Hello, and welcome to the Designing with Love podcast. I am your host, Jackie Pellegrin, where my goal is to bring you information, tips, and tricks as an instructional designer. Hello, GCU students and alumni. Welcome to episode 24 of the Designing with Love podcast. In this episode, I will provide the key details about empathy and journey maps, how to create them, the benefits of using them when designing learning experiences, along with some best practices. If you have any ideas that you would like to share about empathy and journey maps, feel free to send me a text message here in the podcast episode. First, let's cover the key details about empathy maps and why they are important to understand your learners. According to a community article in LinkedIn Learning, an empathy map is a simple diagram that divides a customer or learner persona into 4 quadrants: what they say, what they do, what they think, and what they feel. Each quadrant represents a different aspect of the customer's or learner's experience and perspective. When you fill out each quadrant with relevant data and insights, you can create a holistic picture of your learners by identifying their goals, motivations, and challenges that they experience. Empathy maps are important to develop for a learning experience because they help you get into the mindset of your learner so you can understand their needs and emotions. In addition, empathy maps can help you validate or challenge your assumptions and uncover gaps or opportunities in your learner's journey, because the last thing you want to do is make any assumptions with your learners, right? Therefore, by creating empathy maps for each learning solution, you can create a more relevant and personalized solution that enhances satisfaction and long-term retention. Now that we understand what an empathy map is and why it can be an important tool to understand your learners, let's cover how you can create an empathy map. First, you need to obtain data and insights about your learners to create an effective empathy map. There are several ways you can obtain the data, including interviews, surveys, feedback from courses or sessions, analytics from learning management systems, or direct observations. Make sure to select the type of data that will help you gain the most insights into your learners. Once you have obtained the necessary data and insights, it's time to complete your journey map. You can either draw it by hand or complete the map electronically. There are many types of templates available to help make the process easier for you. One place I like to visit to obtain templates for empathy maps is Canva. I have added the links to some helpful empathy map templates in the show notes if you want to check them out. Next, I will outline the steps to complete your journey map, which are quite simple. Step number 1 is to draw or select a template that has a diagram with the 4 quadrants labeled as say, do, think, and feel. Step number 2 is to fill out each quadrant with relevant data and insights from your sources in terms of the learner's quotes, actions, thoughts, and emotions. Once you have completed the empathy map, you can analyze the data to help you identify patterns and gaps in terms of learner needs, pain points, and goals. These insights can be used to generate ideas and recommendations for improving the learner journey and creating more value for your learners. Now that you know how to create effective empathy maps, let's take a few minutes to review some of the key benefits of creating empathy maps when developing and revising learning experiences. An empathy map can be used to help understand the steps, touch points, and emotions that your learners experience when interacting with the material and when being taught information. You can utilize empathy maps to create personas that represent your learners so that you can understand them better. In addition, you can identify the stages and scenarios of the learner journey and map out the actions, thoughts, and feelings of your learners at each stage, which can be quite helpful. Empathy maps are a great way to evaluate the current state of the journey and identify the gaps, pain points, and opportunities for improvement. Because we know there's always room for improvement, right? Finally, you can design the future state of your learner's journey by creating solutions, messages, and interactions that address your learner's needs. The key is to make sure you test and validate the solutions with your learners so that you can measure their impact on the overall learning and satisfaction. All right, so let's review some best practices when designing empathy maps to ensure you are gathering the data you need and making the most of your time, which is important when it comes to creating learning solutions. First, you want to make sure that you utilize data and insights from multiple sources and methods to obtain a comprehensive and accurate view of your learners. I would recommend gathering qualitative and quantitative data sources, as I mentioned earlier. Next, it is important to avoid generalizations, stereotypes, or biases when filling out the map. Make sure to document the entire journey of your learners and don't leave anything out. Another best practice is to make sure you involve your team and stakeholders when creating the empathy map so that you can gain different perspectives, insights, and ideas. You don't want to box yourself into a corner and only document a specific segment of your learners. Finally, remember to update and refine your empathy map as you learn more about your learner's journey. Empathy maps are meant to be dynamic tools that should evolve with your learner as their needs change. So now that you have the building blocks you need to create empathy maps for your learning experiences, let's take the opportunity to learn about what a journey map is, how to create one, and the best ways to use them, along with some best practices to consider. Typically, a journey map is used as a tool for illustrating a customer's experience. However, you can use a journey map to also understand your learners. It provides insight into how you can meet learners' expectations, influence their behavior to optimize learning, and help motivate them. According to Adobe for Business, most journey maps are designed chronologically, representing the customer or learner experience as a timeline of events. It is important to remember that journey maps are rarely linear because customers and learners often follow a cyclical, multi-channel set of steps, such as completing a training module that is part of new hire training. According to Hanover Research, almost 90% of the professionals who use journey mapping report seeing increases in customer satisfaction, lower turnover rates, fewer customer complaints, and higher NPS scores, which monitor improvements in products and services across the entire customer journey. While journey maps can take many forms, there are 4 types that are most widely used by experts and organizations. Depending on what type of industry you work in, you can tailor your journey map to meet your learners' needs. In this podcast, I will take the opportunity to briefly review each one as outlined by Adobe for Business. The first type is called current state. This type visualizes customers' experiences with your product or service as they currently exist. It is a critical tool for identifying friction points. The second type is called day in the life. This type describes the routine activities of potential customers, regardless of whether they interact with the business. It is meant to identify unmet needs that the product or service can address. The third type is called future state. This type visualizes the ideal journey your team hopes to create. It can be useful when introducing new products, services, or targeting new audience segments. The fourth and final type is called service blueprint. This type starts with one of the maps and layers in technology, employees, and services required for each touch point. This helps to identify how resources are allocated and where adjustments are needed. I find this is actually quite interesting when I read all of this and learned about all these different types from Adobe for Business, because that service blueprint is kind of neat because you layer in all of those areas that I just mentioned, the technology, the employees, and the services, because many times you do have technology and you want to be able to monitor that and be able to outline that. So that is quite interesting. Even though these 4 types of journey maps I just outlined center around customers and businesses, they can still be useful when mapping out a learner's experience in education and training. Now that we understand what a journey map is and why it can be an important tool to understand your learners, let's cover how you can create a journey map. As I mentioned earlier, it is important to gather insights and data about your learners so that you can create a detailed journey map of the interactions. However, what makes a journey map different is that you also want to find out from stakeholders what their desired outcomes are and how the learning solution can best meet those outcomes. Once you have gathered insights, data, and desired outcomes, it is time to decide what you need to include in your journey map. You can either create your journey map manually, or you can look for existing templates that meet your needs. When it comes to journey maps, there are some great templates available in Genially, and that's spelled G as in good, Enially. I have added links to some helpful journey map templates in the show notes if you want to check them out. Building an effective journey map involves 10 key steps as outlined by Adobe for Business. However, I have slightly modified the steps to align with how we work with learners in education and training settings. Step 1 is to set clear objectives. This is done by defining the goals and focusing on specific learner segments or personas. Step 2 is to conduct research. You can do this by gathering qualitative and quantitative data to understand learner behaviors and pain points. Step number 3 is profile personas. This allows you to develop or refine personas based on your research, ensuring the personas reflect your learners' goals and challenges. Step number 4 is to highlight target personas. This allows you to narrow your focus to ensure the map addresses the most relevant insights you have uncovered. Step number 5 is to list all the touch points. This allows you to identify direct and indirect interactions learners have with your course or training session, including key materials. Step number 6 is to map the current journey. Make sure to document how learners currently navigate the journey with your learning experiences. Step number 7 is to map the ideal journey. In this step, you will visualize the optimized path you want learners to follow. Step number 8 is to assess resources. In this step, you will determine the tools, budget, and personnel needed to implement your desired or ideal journey. Step number 9 is to take the journey yourself. In this step, you will test the map to uncover any inconsistencies needed to implement your ideal journey. And finally, step number 10 is to make necessary changes. In this final step, you will implement any adjustments needed to align the journey with learner experiences and expectations. If you want to go back and revisit these steps, I have included a link to the blog post from Adobe for Business in the show notes. Now that you know how to create effective journey maps, let's take a few minutes to review some key benefits of creating journey maps when developing and revising learning experiences. The first benefit I wanted to cover is targeted insights, which allows you to understand learner behaviors and preferences to optimize the overall learning experience. The second benefit is increased engagement, which allows you to create relevant, informative content that improves the overall learning experience and meets desired outcomes. The third benefit is higher retention, which means your learners will retain the content they are learning for the long term, which is important in education and training. The fourth benefit is optimized touchpoints, where you can identify and improve touchpoints with low engagement or poor performance. The fifth and final benefit is learner-centric focus, which is when you prioritize learner needs and address any challenges that occur in a proactive manner. All right, so let's review some best practices when designing journey maps to ensure you are making the most of your time when meeting your learners' needs. First, you want to make sure to review and update your journey maps regularly. Journey maps are not static tools, so they must evolve with the learners and their needs, as I mentioned earlier. Therefore, make sure to review and update them on a regular basis. This could be quarterly, twice a year, or annually, depending on the type of learning experience you are developing, your learners' needs, and the stakeholders' needs as well. Second, you'll want to track performance metrics. It is recommended you take the opportunity to determine what type of performance metrics need to be tracked, such as retention rates, success rates, and learner and stakeholder satisfaction. Another best practice is to incorporate feedback and insights from your learners and stakeholders to identify improvement areas and then incorporate the feedback in meaningful ways. Another best practice is to leverage technology. You can also use automation and analytic tools to scale and personalize various touchpoints, which can be helpful when you are looking to revise any learning experience. And the final best practice is test scenarios. Finally, you can simulate journeys and identify bottlenecks to revise strategies. To do this, it can be helpful to identify a set of target learners where you can test out the simulations and determine what works well and what needs improvement. I hope you have found this information about empathy and journey maps helpful as you design and develop different instructional solutions and learning experiences. As a recap, this podcast episode covered the key details about empathy and journey maps, how to create them, the benefits of creating them when designing learning experiences, along with some best practices. As I conclude this episode, here is an inspiring quote by Dennis Waitley I found on Brainy Quote that I wanted to share about learning experiences. Never become so much of an expert that you stop gaining expertise. View life as a continuous learning experiences. Thank you for taking some time to listen to this podcast episode today. Please take a moment to like the episode and share it with others so they can learn about this topic as well. Have a great day.